So if you...
Oh, sorry, I don't need to do that. My name is... Thank you for whoever in our lovely tech crew remembered to do that, which I did not. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us today, everyone. My name is Julia. I'm here from Hope for the Future. We're hosting this event today. It's just for 1 hour. Thanks so much for joining us. I'll quickly let our panelists introduce themselves, but I do have to give apologies for Olivia Blake MP, who has been brought into the Environment Bill. Amendments have come back to the Commons at an unexpected time, and so she is there, but has recorded a video for us to watch, and has said that we can send any questions over to her afterwards if we would like to do that. So yeah, first I'll hand over to the director of our organisation, Sarah Robinson. Sarah, would you like to quickly introduce yourself? I know you've just come back from Glasgow. How are you feeling at the moment?
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, it's really great to be here. And yes, so I'm the director for Hope for the Future. And for those of you who don't know, Hope for the Future is a UK-based charity that supports people to engage elected representatives on issues around climate change. So I'll be talking a bit more about that later. And yes, I got back from Glasgow on Friday and had a really great busy week last week, sort of Monday to Friday, just taking in everything that was going on at Cop26, meeting with partners, and yeah, keeping up to date with all of the latest updates, which I think we're going to hear from Chris about. So yeah, shall I hand over to Chris to introduce himself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Chris Venables, and my role is as head of politics at Green Alliance, which is a kind of cross-party, independent environmental think tank based in London. So I've been up here now for 10 days and lost all sense of time and self. Yeah, but thanks so much to Hope for the Future for inviting us to be here, and yeah, looking forward to the discussion and this session. So yeah, look forward to answering questions and thinking about what we do next.
Brill, thank you so much, Chris. And yeah, because of tech issues, Chris got the invite about 1 minute before all of you got let in. And so thanks, Chris, for that and for your patience. Yes, so what we're talking about today is how can we as campaigners keep up the pressure for global action post COP26. So the format is going to be about 10 or so, 10, 15 minutes of Chris telling us what the successes and failures are of COP so far, what's been going on. We've got a little video from Olivia Blake, who is an MP for Sheffield Hallam here in the UK, and she's going to tell us a bit of a politician's perspective. And then once Chris has told us the sort of what is going on and what we can be thinking about, Sarah's going to talk to us about the how. Hope for the Future is a UK-based charity which specialises in communicating with politicians about climate change. So not just thinking about the policy side, but thinking about how we frame that policy to make it attractive and appealing and make that change happen. So all the way throughout, please do put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'd really love to have them, have it as more of a discussion. We have only got a 1 hour session today, and so we're hoping we'll cover a lot in that hour. Yeah, please do put your questions in the chat, and also we will be recording this, and so it will be available to watch on demand, so you can tell all of your friends and family to go back and watch this brilliant webinar that you attended. I've loved seeing somebody in the chat already saying that they're from Helsinki in Finland. Amazing. If you'd like to tell us in the chat where you're coming from, that would be brilliant. If you've got any perspectives on the kind of engaging with your local politicians outside of the UK, we'd always be fascinated to hear about that. Our knowledge is mainly UK based, but it'd be interesting to see where those crossovers and collaborations are. Great. Without further ado, I think I'll pass to you, Chris. Thank you so much for being here. I'm sure you're completely out of it with everything that's going on. But yeah, any headlines that you could share with us, we would really love to hear.
Great, thanks, Julia. Yeah, so I'll give a bit of a take from the inside, I suppose. I'll just whiz my laptop round and show you that so this is a take from the inside, I suppose. we can think about the limitations of that. But yeah, I took the brief to heart and just wrote a list of the good and a list of the bad, really, of what's happened so far. So we're on the first day of week 2, and week 1 really kicked off, I suppose, with that World Leaders Summit. So I think it was 120 heads of state here in Glasgow, here in the Blue Zone. Yeah, I guess what felt like a real bit of energy behind climate action. We can talk about the substance, but I think there is something powerful that we kind of shouldn't lose sight of 192 countries being in this room and trying to negotiate the complexities of decarbonising the global economy at scale and pace. It's no mean feat. So I think, yeah, I'll start with the good. I'll start with a bit of hope, and then kind of quickly into, unfortunately, quickly into some of what we know hasn't happened and what needs to happen. What we can do this week still. I think there's still a window. There's still lots that we can do this week, but really importantly, then kind of what our role is as campaigners on the 14th of November, on that Monday morning after we've all had a bit of a rest over the weekend, and we kind of open our eyes to what comes next. So I'll just kind of whiz through that. So I think on the good, for those of that there's, it's really nice to hear where everyone's from. Please keep putting that in the chat. Greetings to Yemen. So I think we've had, I think the story of this COP so far has been these big side deals. So the main, COP process, as you may know, is countries that this was in the Paris Agreement. Is countries come forward with their NDC, that's their nationally determined contribution, and they say by 2030 we're going to decarbonize our economy by X amount, and we're going to do it through, these 4 or 5 ways, and they submit a plan. But I think what we've seen is a lot of bits happening around that formal process. So last Monday and Tuesday, we saw 3 big deals that had been agreed on the sidelines, I suppose, of these negotiations. And I suppose that the context for that is that when this presidency began, Trump was still in the White House. There was a lot of pessimism around kind of these global kind of multilateral spaces, and the UK presidency decided to kind of crack on with processes that came around the kind of formal UNFCCC bit. And so those were on methane, on coal and forests. On methane, we saw 105 countries pledge to tackle methane emissions. We saw 25 new countries commit to phase out coal. We saw 100 countries make a commitment around deforestation. I'll come to the limits of those shortly, but those are 3 really big, chunky, important bits of this puzzle, and that is progress. And I think we have to kind of hold and pinch ourselves a bit and remember that in all of the news around, not closing the gap, there is some good stuff happening. We saw India make a new commitment to net zero. We saw Nigeria make a new commitment to net zero and make pledges around action this decade. Other good bits, we saw Scotland be the first ever country to pledge money for loss and damage. So loss and damage is a technical term, but it's basically, it's really significant. It's a country that for the first time has pledged money to pay for the damages that are being incurred right now and have been incurred right now by climate change. So it's not just the finance needed to help countries make the transition in investing in clean energy, and it's not just the funding to help people adapt in the future, it's money to pay for the damage that's already happened. That's quite a big deal. It's a small amount of money, but it's a little diplomatic opening. So I think those are some of the good things. And collectively, We've seen various analysts, so the International Energy Association and some academics from the University of, I think it was Melbourne or Sydney, start to say that if those pledges are delivered on, and again, I'll come back to the if because it's a significant if, that we would start to see the temperature shift. We know that we're on course for around 3 degrees of warming at the moment, but again, we're starting to see that shift downwards. Again, hold that if in your mind because that's relevant to what needs to happen next. So I think, and the IEA said, again, these are numbers that I'll speak briefly to in a moment, but that we might be shifting towards a 2-degree pathway. That is a kind of like critical number. Obviously, the Paris Agreement, which is kind of the basis of all of this now, set in the text of the Paris Agreement a target of 2 degrees with efforts to 1.5 degrees, which is that number that we all know is vital for climate justice. So I think that's some of the good. Outside of all of that, I think seeing hundreds of thousands of people on the street was good. And there's absolutely like no doubt that has like massively injected energy into this into these negotiations. As someone who spent most of their time on the outside on the streets doing this stuff, sometimes you feel like, are we being heard? I would say yes. I think people in here, it does give a sense of purpose. It does give a sense of urgency. So I think that's some of the good. Hopefully that gives a little bit of hope. On the bad, then those are just pledges and they are just targets, and that isn't enough. You know, we know from here in the UK we've got a climate target. We don't have the policies to get there. We're kind of getting them slowly, and we can say the same thing of probably all those big pledges on methane, on coal, on deforestation, new targets from India and Nigeria. Yeah, so we need to see the substance on those, and again, that's where I'm going to kind of end with a bit of a call to all of us. So as much as those new targets might be shifting the dial on what countries have said they're going to do, the kind of crucial thing now is, well, are you going to do it and how are you going to do it? And that's where we have to hold them to account. And as people are kind of saying in the chat, there's absolutely no way that's going to happen without all of us speaking up and continuing to put pressure on governments. So I think, you know, and just to give a flavor of that, the coal announcement, as good as it was, didn't have China, India, Australia, or the US, who collectively account for 75% of coal emissions globally. We had the forest announcement that Indonesia then kind of backtracked from. We had the methane pledge, no, in the coal pledge, Poland signed on the same day and then unsigned in the afternoon. So I think we're seeing all kinds of wobbles there of countries stepping forward, stepping back. I think let's not be too worried about that. I think that kind of like political progress is meaningful. So yeah, so I think let's take a bit of hope, I think, from the fact that we have had our voices heard, that we are shifting the dial, and it's not fast enough. We're going to see a report from the United Nations tomorrow, which you should watch out for. They'll give their assessment on how far pledges at COP have shifted the dial. So watch out for that. I think it will be a kind of useful boost to all of us, but it's not enough. And our pledges should be taking us to 1.5. They shouldn't be taking us to 2. The ambition should be to 1.5 and it's not. So yeah, so I think I'll stop shortly, but just to say on what we should be doing, for those of us in the UK, I would say Boris Johnson was here at the beginning. He needs to be here at the end. There's always a push at the end. There's always a push to actually sign on the dotted line. And that can't just be up to the people in the room. You need top level political leadership. So I think, you know, whether it's through social media or all the routes that we have, put pressure on Boris Johnson to come back here and to own this deal and own this process and move the things forward that need to be done so. There's all kinds of very technical, wonky things that are being discussed at the moment, and they are vital. And many of you may well know more about them than a lot of than myself. But it really is, complicated articles of the Paris Agreement. And let's not forget that 192 countries have to all agree on it. You can't just be one. They've all got to agree to the text. So I think we should put pressure on number 10 for those in the UK, for those globally, put pressure on your own leaders. At the moment on the ground in Glasgow, world leaders have gone. We've got negotiators who've been here for the last 3 or 4 days. They'll be joined by foreign ministers and environment ministers from today, who then try and push stuff across the line. And then I think kind of my main takeaway, at least for myself, is that we need to pressure on delivery. The COP, all of this stuff has to happen at a domestic level. All of this stuff requires countries to act and to push. And I think, what we've seen at COP is a bit of a reinvigoration, a little bit of that kind of global space. I think, let's not forget that during those kind of Trump years, it was an incredible space. It was, basically ground to a halt in lots of ways. So that space is having, a bit of energy back into it. But it only works if we're doing what we need to do on the ground. So here in the UK, I just think that means that, we can't let up, that we have to completely, keep that pressure up to hold government's feet to the fire, and to use all the ways that we have, whether that's on the streets or like myself doing more inside track work, to make sure that, between now and the next election, which is 2024 in the UK, that is a climate election, and that, we continue to see politicians have to kind of battle it out on climate grounds. So I think that's the way to keep 1.5 alive. I think that's the way to keep ourselves energized. So I think my headline is there's been a bit of progress. Of course, it's not enough. We should give ourselves a massive pat on the back for the progress that we have seen, have a little nap, and pick ourselves up again and keep going.
Thanks so much, Chris. That was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much for talking to us from the ground, and real causes for optimism there, but also, those considerations of how much work needs to come still. Now is my technical moment where I'm going to share our video from Olivia. So I will just do that. And I'm hoping somebody will tell me if you can't.
Thank you so much for inviting me today to speak, and I'm sorry that I can't be with you live. By the time you watch this, I will be in the chamber for the debate on the House of Lords amendments to the Environment Bill. Unfortunately, the debate was moved to later in the day because of an emergency debate in standards in public life, triggered by the lobbying controversy surrounding Owen Paterson. As a member of the Shadow DEFRA team, I'll be sat on the front bench for this debate. Ironically, both the issues, the environment and standards in life, public life, on the parliamentary agenda today reflect what I would have said to you in person. The debate on standards and public life raises serious issues about accountability, lobbying, and who holds power in our society. And the debate on the environmental bill deals with the issues of how we protect our environment and the natural world. To tackle the twin climate and nature emergency, we need to get to grips with both. The Cop26 negotiations provide a good example for why that's the case. On the weekend, I went to Glasgow to join the summit, but I also went to join the crowds of people outside the conference demanding climate justice. For too long, those two voices have been too distinct. Meeting the urgent challenge of the climate and nature emergency means closing that gap. And if the recent lobbying scandal has shown us anything, it's that the only way to do that is to challenge the entrenched power. That means democratising our economy and our society. No one on this call engineered the climate crisis, neither did the climate refugees fleeing their homes, or the species whose habitats face destruction. The cause of the climate catastrophe is a system that rewards profit and accumulation at the expense of people and planet. Real climate justice means remaking and redemocratising that system. For as long as rich and powerful people make the decisions or are given privileged access to decision makers, those decisions will be taken in their interests and not the interests of everyone else. I see my role as amplifying the voice of people who should be part of that discussion. It's why I met with people in my constituency over the course of the last year to produce the Sheffield Hallam Cop26 Manifesto. You can download it from my website, and you should because it sets out a range of ideas from what green public transport should look like to how we achieve international climate justice. I'm pleased to have taken those ideas, sourced from the people of my constituency, to the heart of Westminster, because it's only by breaking down the walls between the decision makers and the people that will achieve climate justice. Now, everyone in this country has an MP, and I'd encourage you to engage with your MP to make sure that we're all fighting as hard as we can to end climate change and achieve climate justice. Thank you so much for inviting me.
There we go. I hope everybody enjoyed that. In our training, which Sarah's going to talk about in a little bit, we talk about how hard the job of an MP is. And I think Olivia sat in her office like last minute this evening reading that somebody who's clearly like worked very hard to prepare for her is a testament to how hard they work. And I think she's in the chamber right now. So Sarah, Olivia was just calling us there to write to our MPs if we're UK based. As you well know as our director, that's exactly what we encourage people to do. Could you give us a bit more of a sense of how we support people to work with their MPs and that kind of the how as well as the what to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that was really great to hear from Chris there about the good and the bad that's coming out of COP26. Really good to have that kind of really clear overview there. And then also from Olivia, that call to action to actually be engaging with our MPs. And as Chris was saying, you know, COP is happening, COP is where the ambitions and the targets get set, but actually the action happens domestically after the conference is over. So Hope for the Future exists to support people to have effective engagements with their MPs, with their elected representatives, on climate change. I don't know if some of you might have heard about the number of people from the fossil fuel industry who are actually delegates at COP26 at the moment. That news I think just came out today, and I think that's a stark reminder that, you know, we as constituents need to be continuing to put the pressure on, because unfortunately the fossil fuel industry voice is still very present. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about the training that Hope for the Future offers, and while we work in the UK and we work to engage UK MPs and councillors and other elected representatives, the approach that we use is applicable to kind of any elected representative, and you know that could be internationally as well for those of you who are joining us from abroad. So yeah, very warm welcome to you. So COP26 has been a great opportunity for climate change to be at the front and centre of everyone's minds. So filling headlines and marching through cities, as we've seen, and debates in Parliament, as you know, Olivia Blake is currently right now on the Environment Bill. But when it's over, we need it to remain at the front of everyone's minds, because as we've talked about, we need that action to actually make those ambitions and those targets happen. But MPs do tend to be generalists, and probably the same with councillors as well. So they always have, you know, lots of different issues coming into their inboxes, and you know, they're faced with hundreds of emails every day from all sorts of different topics. So it's incredibly important that their constituents continue to write to them and meet with them about climate change, so that they know that it's a priority for those that they are representing. And that is, of course, all of us who have elected representatives, it's up to us to be contacting them. And we quite often hear from MPs that they don't often hear from constituents about the issue. So, for example, our MP in Sheffield, not Olivia Blake, but Paul Blomfield is one of our other MPs. He said to us a few years ago, you know, I personally care about the issue, but I don't feel I can talk about it much in Parliament or in my work because I just never hear from my constituents about it. So obviously we've done a lot of work in our own city of Sheffield to make sure that that's no longer the case, and that Paul is, you know, hearing a lot from his constituents about that. So it really does make a difference what MPs get into their mailboxes. So yeah, so that is really important. So when Hope for the Future first started out, we found that many of the meetings that we were kind of attending and observing reflected the quite adversarial approach to politics that you might see in the media. So you might have seen PMQs or interviews with Jeremy Paxman where MPs are kind of challenged and berated, but unfortunately in a kind of constituent MP meeting, that often leads to conversation breakdown and means that progress can't be made, and you know, it doesn't lead to kind of productive conversations that do lead to change. So the key to our approach at Hope for the Future is understanding your MP and their values. So even if you don't agree with your MP and their political ideology, the key is finding an area of common ground where you might be able to find that commonality and start to build a sort of working relationship with them. So one example that we use from a few years ago when we were sort of first starting out, we were working with Philip Davies MP, who was actually one of the 5 MPs who voted against the Climate Change Act in 2008. So, you know, he was quite reluctant to be doing anything on climate change. But we worked with his constituents who, you know, really wanted to engage and wanted to influence if they could. So we found that he actually had a real kind of local focus and was a bit of a local hero and just really wanted to be representing his constituents. And there were high instances of fuel poverty in his constituency. So we worked with the constituents and went to him and said, look, we need better housing efficiency. This will obviously reduce fuel bills for your constituents and lift people out of fuel poverty. But from our perspective, it, you know, it'll also reduce emissions, contributing to the climate crisis. So we had a really successful engagement there. And as I say, even though the MP and the constituents, you know, fundamentally disagreed on the issue of climate change, we were able to find that area of common ground to work with. I think these days you're probably unlikely to have an MP who is, you know, against climate action or, you know, doesn't believe in the science or that sort of thing. But there are obviously there are MPs who are maybe adverse to the approach that the government are trying to take, and the way that we're hopefully achieving net zero. But as I say, so that's the kind of basis of our approach and the key to good influencing. So how do you find out what your MP's interests are and what their values are? So you have to do a bit of research, and I would say do this even before you sit down to write that very first letter to them. You want to kind of understand who they are a bit better. So there's loads of ways that you can find out a bit more about your MP. That can be through the website They Work For You. Some of you might have used that before. That gives an entire profile, parliamentary profile of every single MP in the UK. And again, I'm aware we've got a bit of an international audience. I don't know if there are any databases like this internationally, but if you do know of them within your own country, then please do share them in case others might be able to make use of that. But also you can look at their website and their social media, word of mouth, so whether you know other people within your area who've met with them before, and also actually meeting with them. So you know, you might have an initial meeting where you know a bit about them, a bit about what they stand for, the campaigns that they've been working on, but actually we propose that actually building a relationship is the best way to influence the person who's representing you. So meeting with them quite regularly, maybe twice a year. So that's how you can start to build up a bit of a picture of your MP or your elected representative. And then it's about building an ask. So what are you actually going to go in and ask your MP to do? What can you ask them to take action on? So some of you might be aware of the acronym SMART, and we would always say to think of a SMART ask to ask your MP to take action on. So that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. So you want your ask to be really specific, so not just kind of going in and saying solve climate change, because they're not going to know what to do with that. So what is something really specific you can ask them to do? Measurable, so you can sort of come back to them and say, has this been done or not? Has it been achieved or not? Achievable, you need to ask them to do something that is actually within their power to do. So for example, if you're working with a council or a councillor, you can't really ask them to do something that would be a more national policy ask, or vice versa. You can't necessarily ask your MP to do something that would be a council issue, like I don't know, like the local recycling or something like that. Realistic, so how likely is it that your MP is actually going to say yes to it? If they're really not great on climate change and climate action, it's probably better to go something a bit less ambitious and then sort of build up from that, rather than kind of going in asking them to propose a private member's bill, which they're never going to agree to until you've met with them a few times. And then time bound as well really helps to keep track of whether your MP has actually done the thing that you've asked them to or not. So you can follow up with them, say in 2 weeks' time, to see if they have actually done what they've agreed to. So an example of a SMART ask could be, you could ask your MP to submit an oral question to the Foreign Secretary, asking her how she plans to work with international partners who have signed the pledge to immediately restore old growth forests and enhance global biodiversity. So that's kind of based on the deforestation pledge that has been made, but it's really specific. So can you ask your MP to submit an oral question? That's really specific to the Foreign Secretary. It's measurable. Have they submitted the question or not? It's probably achievable. All MPs can submit oral questions unless they're a minister, so make sure they're not one of those. It might be realistic depending on your MP, and then time bound, if there's a question time coming up, you can sort of ask them to do it at that specific one or in an upcoming debate. And it's important to think about what motivates your MP as well. So are there things you could ask them to do that would kind of speak to what it is that motivates them? So for example, if you're in a marginal seat, can you give them an ask that kind of provides them a constituency mandate, or giving them a platform and good publicity so that their constituents can see that they're doing stuff on this issue. If they think that's a vote winner, then they're going to be more likely to say yes to that. Or if they're someone who just doesn't seem to know much about it, you could offer them, increased knowledge of the issue and that sort of thing. And so thinking about some conversation techniques as well, we find that the most successful MP engagements are those that are based on collaboration. And our approach draws on influencing theory, which shows that feelings of safety and well-being and trust lead to greater collaboration. So we have the power to create that atmosphere in a meeting. So just kind of going in and being friendly and telling your MP that you're there to work with them and not just kind of, yes, holding them account and maybe challenging them, but not in a kind of aggressive way. questioning can be a really powerful tool as well to challenge someone's perspective, because sometimes if you fundamentally disagree on something, if you both just kind of put forward your opinion, you're just going to end up telling each other your opinion and nothing's going to change. Whereas you can use questions, you know, oh, can you explain that a bit more? Oh, what do you value about that? What impact do you think that has on your constituents? Those sorts of questions can really help to get someone to think about their own viewpoint and why it is that they might hold that. So yeah, that's a really useful thing to think about as well. So it's really important to get the balance as well. So you don't want to be so goal focused that you reach a stalemate, but you also don't want to be so relationship focused that you're treading on eggshells. So it's really important to build that relationship, but also, you know, be clear with your asks. So the aim is to build a relationship based on trust and respect, but also be armed with specific actions to suggest to your MP that are realistic and within their power. And by communicating in this way, we have the power to influence change on a local, national, and potentially global scale. And with that, I will hand back to Julia.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was a real whistle-stop tour of some of the things that we put in our training, which can be up to 8 hours long. And so that really was the brief version. It was brilliant. Something that occurred to me while you were talking is another part of our training is this 1 to 5 scale. And we've had a few people in the chat say my MP, you know, ignores me and doesn't care at all about climate change. And somebody else gave a scary statistic: 1 in 15 Conservative MPs think climate change is a myth. I wonder if that's still true. But there is a growing group of these cost of net zero MPs who are trying to talk a lot about how expensive climate change is. It made me think about something that in our training that really sticks with me and I think about a lot, is this thing of recognizing where we are at on the 1 to 5 scale. We really, really care about climate change. And if you'll let me speak for you in the audience, the fact that you're giving up your evening or whichever time zone you're in to be here, I expect you're also a 5 on our 1 to 5 scale, where 5 is that you really, really care about climate change. And 1 is that, you know, you're not sure, or you think that climate change is a myth. So on this scale, you're probably a 5 out there. You really, really care about it. You think that we need to take action now. And of course, everyone in this room, we are together on that. But for people who are at a 1 or a 2, that can be very alienating if we talk in that way and if we put that pressure on, as much as we need it, and we really do, it can be very scary. And so what our approach is all about is trying to bring people in at the level that they are currently at and get them on that journey, even if it feels frustrating really early on. I often give a bad metaphor, especially while Bake Off is on. If I wanted to get somebody into baking, I'd start with flapjacks rather than a 5-tier wedding cake. But it feels very frustrating when we're not talking about baking, we're talking about climate change, which is really, really scary and depressing and now. But time after time, we've been doing this for a while. If you can get someone on that journey early, or if you can get them on that journey, then they will progress and they will move up that scale, but it does take a bit of time. And anyway, I'm not the one that's supposed to be talking. Chris, I'm going to throw a question at you if that's okay, which is from me, which is, if I did have an MP who is a 1 on the scale and was, you know, not even convinced by climate change or hasn't really said anything about climate change, what do you think I should be asking them in policy terms, if you could? Or if we have an MP who's potentially a 5 on that scale and is really, really already quite hot on climate change, is there anything that you think, like a bit one of some of that wonky stuff, that like policy stuff that you think we could be asking them? So at either side of that scale, if that's not a too hard questions just filling at you.
No, that's fine. So yeah, and just to respond to the stat as well around 1 in 15% of MPs. I mean, I think I just kind of go a little bit back to where Sarah started, that MPs are across every single issue, and I worked in an MP's office for 3 years. The majority of the time is spent on casework and constituency work, which is often around homelessness or housing, and so the kind of brain space for any issue is quite small. But for that reason, it's also quite powerful when they hear from the right person who can kind of change their mind. So I just give, yes, we need to convince more people, but we can do it. And one of the reasons we can do it, just to then answer the question, is because the real economy is changing basically every day. Like, you know, clean, as we know, kind of clean energy is now the cheapest form of electricity generation. Jobs in the green economy are like being added again every day, whether it's working, planting trees or restoring peatlands, to building offshore wind in the North Sea. And so I think one way into, I think that, you know, most MPs and most people, when you look at what the polling is around issues, it's always the economy, it's always health, and increasingly it's environment and education. And on economy and education and health as well, the climate kind of environmental ins to all of those things are huge. So I think there's always a way in to talk to an MP about climate change, even if it's not by going in and talking about climate change. If it's talking about the jobs that could be there, whether it's a clean steel plant, or in new ways of recycling, or in restoring and protecting nature, those jobs are there, they're growing. I think there's a way in, even for the most hardened Conservative MP, and we see that now with, in the UK, Steve Baker and co, who are casting doubt. You know, people talk that delay is the new denial on climate change, and you've seen people like Craig McKinley and Steve Baker really kind of pushing this delay narrative of it's too expensive and nobody wants it and undemocratic. But even they in their constituencies have huge kind of like have huge economic potential, and literally jobs that are there right now that are directly relevant to this issue. So I just think like they're going to shift, and we just need to nudge them. So I think that's on the kind of lower one. Just help MPs to see that it's relevant to the stuff that they hear about anyway. Air pollution's another good way in. You know, used to be coal power, but now kind of fossil fuel cars we all drive. So there's ways into that. On the people who are convinced and are on the 5, I just always think there's some really, you know, we need more champions like that, and I think there's always bigger things that you can ask people to do. But certainly, obviously, in the UK at the moment, what we're seeing is a block by the Chancellor and by the Treasury to kind of really spend the money that we need. So I think, you know, getting those people to kind of be more active in pushing, particularly the Treasury, particularly the Chancellor, to really kind of turn the taps on in those areas where we know we need it. So I think their voices are always kind of really welcome. And on specific policy areas, don't want to get too into that because it's quite nerdy, and ultimately 4/7 probably too much. But I think I think housing is the really big one that we need to get into now. We know the majority of how we heat our homes is through gas boilers. I think the majority of us, I certainly don't really think about that very often, that I have this thing that's just burning gas in my house to keep my house warm. And that I can say for my house anyway, in my shared leaky East London house share with single glazed windows, that were just kind of like basically, it's just kind of, it's completely unnecessary. We need to insulate our homes and we need to get rid of gas boilers. So that's the kind of nerdy next thing. But I think for kind of, when you're going to talk to MPs, you don't even need to get into that. It can really just be as simple as we're off track to our targets, we need to get there. And you know, just asking them to ask the right people the right questions, I think is the most important thing that we can all do.
Could I just jump in there, Julia?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with Chris on that stat about the Conservative MPs thinking climate change is a myth, and completely agree that, you know, the in with an MP like that is the co-benefits. And also just to say that I feel quite hopeful actually, because we've been doing this for several years now, and sort of 3 or 4 years ago, it was almost impossible to get a Conservative MP to talk about climate change, even if they were, you know, up at a 4 or a 5 on the opinion scale, as Julia's been talking about, because it was seen as a career limiting move. And we even worked with an MP who said, he was a Conservative MP, he said, I'll do whatever you want me to do on climate change as long as I don't have to say the words climate change. And that's how much of a career limiting move it was seen. And there was just this silence in Parliament around the issue, and that has really changed. So even though there's this quite astonishing stat about the number of Conservative MPs who might think it's a myth, it's now probably more controversial for someone to admit that than it would be in the past for them to, you know, be supporting climate change. So I think that's a really important thing to kind of hold on to. And I think kind of culture and influence from other co-workers and things within Parliament is a really influential factor. So I definitely take hope from that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah. And also thank you to Sarah from the Cop26 Coalition, who's put a message in the chat. We did have a question about will it continue to exist post-COP? And as we are not from the coalition, we are just kindly hosted by them. I am not in a position to answer, but that one has been answered in the chat, so thank you. We've also had a really interesting question about on kind of a global level, what are the possibilities of developing an enforcement mechanism that puts pressure on governments to at least educate civilians of the effect of global warming, I think. Very interesting, and yeah, great to be prompting these during this kind of global conversation, at this global conversation tonight. Has anyone got any thoughts on that? I wouldn't know. You know, we have been very UK focused, I hope, for the future. It might be, I think we had somebody in the chat talking about a local initiative trying to get more climate education in schools. So if you are here and you wanted to tell us about it, you'd be very welcome. But yeah, any thoughts on that kind of global level of like international diplomacy enforcements?
I can say a few words on that, although it really is quite far outside of where I feel comfortable. But I think I guess I'd just highlight some of the work of an organisation called Teach the Future here in the UK, who managed to push the UK government anyway on Friday of last week to make an announcement around climate change in the curriculum and doing more to educate, to kind of put that education piece as part of the picture. It always feels like it's just missing, and hopefully yeah, I'm sure that was kind of felt here in Glasgow as well, and they did make a pitch around it. I suppose the other sad reality is that we're all just now experiencing it. I don't think there'll be a single person on this planet who doesn't, if they haven't already experienced quite, you know, directly those impacts, and I think that kind of tragedy, you know, will translate and is translating into more kind of push for action. So yeah, but yeah, I would also be fascinated to know what kind of education initiatives exist, but certainly we've seen like a bit of a shift on here in that in the UK, although the bar was quite low. We had quite kind of poor bits in our curriculum, and I suppose one thing to say as well is that you know, part of one of the important bits of that piece, and we've seen that here, is that people went, oh, what, my gas boiler is bad for the climate, including myself. And I was like, yeah, it is gas, and that is a fossil fuel, and we are burning it. And so I think there was that kind of, there is that just basics, and you do think to yourself, why didn't that happen 10 years ago? That the government did some of that education piece. I think it's always tricky because people intuitively, particularly in centre right, in governments or in states where there's a centre-right government, they're elected upon that ticket of like not telling people what to do, and that's always a politically difficult thing. So I think getting that right is a challenge, and kind of will keep being a challenge for countries like the UK where there is that kind of dynamic. But yeah, I would love to know if anyone does know any more, and will certainly be looking to find out a little bit more myself, because it's a really brilliant question.
Brill. Sarah, did you want to come in on that one, or I think there might be some more questions? Or I just, oh sorry.
Yeah, no, the only thing I was going to say, I agree with what Chris said, and also it is kind of out of my area of expertise as well, but I'd say there's a huge role for media to play in that as well. And well, in the UK, I don't know what it's been like more internationally, but in the UK, the amount of money that the government put into kind of education campaigns on COVID was phenomenal, and we've seen how effective that can be and how well it can be done. So could we not get something like that on climate as well? But also I think there was an update about 12 of the UK's media brands agreeing to increase the quality and quantity of climate change coverage. I think I actually got that from a Green Alliance update, so I don't want to claim that as my own knowledge. But that is a kind of fantastic step forward as well in terms of informing the British public at least on climate and more of the updates that are going on. And again, I was talking about before about that silence in Parliament. I think there's just been a general silence around climate change, and I wouldn't say it's accidental, but I hope that tide is changing, and with media companies agreeing to communicate more about climate change, I think that's a fantastic step forward as well.
Absolutely, yeah. What a great piece of information. Thanks for putting that in the chat, Chris. So yeah, something I saw a nice message in the chat about when we were talking about retrofitting and keeping warm homes, that in Edinburgh the unions are behind that campaign. I think it's a really great point to remember about the different parts of our movement, and so all the way from the marches and hundreds of thousands of people on the street to this one-to-one campaigning that we're talking about doing, talking directly with your MP. There are a whole host of things in between that we can all be doing, and so for people in our lives that didn't get that climate education, trying to talk to them in a way, at the dinner table, at the Christmas dinner table about climate change, and trying as best as we can to share that information, and working with our trade unions, our tenants unions, all of our other community organisations to really highlight those co-benefits that we've been talking about, and all of that intersections that does happen, and of course centering climate justice at the heart of this, and remembering who gets affected. I'm just seeing if we've got any other questions. We did get a technical one about people who live in flats and can't have ground source heat pumps. What can they have? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I'd be interested to hear it, Chris, if you know. If that is a technical policy one.
I think there's two answers to that. Although I can hear our heating policy person shouting in my ear that this, because it's way more complicated than this. But I think heat pump tech is just getting better and better, and will just improve and get smaller and more cost effective and all of that. So I think heat pumps are the primary route. As to the mechanics of where they go, unless someone's put it in the chat, which is the other thing I was going to say, is that it's really normal in many European countries anyway, so I couldn't speak for elsewhere, to have heating that is done on a district level, that, and that you have a kind of single point that provides hot water and for heating. So that's Elizabeth in the chat who said that. But yeah, my understanding is that heat pumps will form the basis of it, and I did see someone on Twitter recently got tiny little heat pump in their flat, in a block of flats. So happy to follow up on that one with someone who actually knows their stuff properly from Green Alliance.
Yeah, I'll give a big flag for Green Alliance, who do brilliant policy work and have great explainers. So do check them out after this. Okay, we only have a couple of minutes left. Kathy, I'm sorry, you've raised, if you think you could do your question in about 30 seconds, we would love to have it. So I'm going to allow you to talk. Don't know if that's come through to you, Kathy. If not, please do put it in the chat. Sorry, Kathy. I'll have to be strict on our timing because I know we've got places to be. I guess all that is left is to ask the panelists if you had a very quick closing remark to finish us off, and then a huge thank you to everyone who's come. So yeah, Chris, any final thoughts for the evening?
No, thanks, Julia. Yeah, I'll just reiterate what I said at the start, that COPs are a particular thing in this ecosystem of places where we need to see change. And I'm glad to see so many people on this call, and all the kind of hundreds of thousands of people who've made that call into this space. But once the kind of circus and show has closed down, we're back to kind of focusing nationally, and to like pushing for all the stuff that we need to see, the money to be invested, the policy to be implemented, and that all of our politicians and government really feel that pressure. So yes, indeed. So yes, so I think basically, if you've been taking part in COP, have a good nap, have a good rest. After it's done, pick yourself back up, and let's just keep going, and keep the pressure on.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Chris. Sarah, any final comments from you? I know you've got another event tonight that you're working immediately after this one.
Yes, no, I think Chris covered it pretty well there, but yeah, I'd agree. I think you know, COP26 is just a moment. It's just it's just time for ambition to be made, but the real work and the action has to come after in order to actually achieve those ambitions, and that we as voters have the power to influence change and influence how that happens. So do take part, do write letters, sign petitions, meet with your elected representatives, so that you can have your voice heard.
Love that, Sarah. Thank you so much. It reminded me, there's a quote that I love from Melissa Jura Grant, which is that solidarity is power and love directed. And so tonight we've been talking about COP26, which is one direction for us to take our activism, but it's us that provides the power and the love. And, you know, it's all of us here who bring that. And so thank you, everyone, so much for coming tonight. Thank you to our wonderful tech team, who you cannot see, but who are working so hard behind the scenes. And thank you to the People Summit for hosting us tonight. It has been lovely to see some new people and to have quite an international event. I'm 1 minute over, so I will stop and just say thank you so much to everyone. Have a lovely rest of your evening.